All right. Thank you for coming to my talk instead of Jake's. That's very brave of you. I'm here to talk about something that's really, really important to me. Something that's really had an impact on my career and on my life, and that is working in a calm work environment. And so today we're going to talk specifically about what that means, what it is, why it's so important, and how we can all sort of start to work together to kind of get there. I want to start with a little bit of background. Normally, I don't like to talk about myself. It's not really relevant. My history or anything like that is not usually relevant to a talk. But in this case, it is. So currently, I work for a company called Basecamp in Chicago, like I said. And I've been there for 6 years, which is twice as long as I've ever been at any other job. Now, prior to working at Basecamp, I had worked in just about every kind of company out there, every kind of sort of tech company out there for about 13 years. And I worked in environments that were big, small, corporate, stuffy environments, cool design agencies. I've worked as a full-time employee, an independent contractor. I've also worked as a programmer, a project manager, and the director of a team of about 15 people. So I've sort of seen a lot of different things in the tech area. And what was really interesting is that having seen so many of those kind of different environments, I noticed that they all kind of basically have the same two problems. The first is that we have no time to do our actual work at work, right? It always seems like we're kind of rushing to meet some deadline that crept up on us, or there's always some chaotic rush to the end to finish what we need to do, or maybe we're not even quite happy with the quality of our work, right? Because we ran out of time. And one of the main reasons we can't get our work done at work is because there's just a constant, unrelenting stream of interruptions and distractions, right? They come in every possible way. There's meetings, chat, phone calls, IMs, you get tapped on the shoulder, like every possible way that you could be interrupted, right? And so because of that, there's no really such thing as a work day anymore, right? My boss, Jason, has this great phrase that I want to borrow. He says, you don't have a work day anymore, you have a work moment, right? Your day is just chopped up into these little bits, right? You get an hour here, you get an hour there, maybe 30 minutes before lunch, and all of a sudden you don't really have a day where you had any kind of rhythm or flow. It's just kind of chopped up into little bits, right? All of you can probably relate. You've probably had a day where you clock in at 9, you leave at 5, and you're like, well, I was at work and I did work-like things, but I didn't actually get my work done, right? That actually does happen. And so because you can never get your work done at work, what happens, right? You end up working more and more off hours, and that leads to our second problem, which is that we're just working too much. Like plain and simple, we're working too much, right? When you can't get your work done at work, what do you end up doing? You start working on personal time, right? The deadlines don't move. Your bosses still expect the work to get done, right? So while we're not able to get our work done at work, there's even an actually bigger, sort of darker issue that's out there that's causing us to work too much. And that's the fact that overwork is glamorized. So many people in our industry make it sound cool or heroic or necessary that you have to work a lot of hours in order to get things done, right? You see this all the time. I put out sort of an informal question on Twitter just asking people like, hey, can you tell me some of the worst sort of overworking stories you've ever heard? And I just got a stream of stuff, like a ton of stuff coming in from people, like so many, and I'll show you some of them later. But I want to show you two of my personal favorites right now. So this one is from Marissa Mayer, who is an ex-Googler / CEO of Yahoo. And she was quoted in a Business Week article saying, could you work 130 hours a week? The answer is yes, if you're strategic about when you sleep, when you shower, and how often you go to the bathroom. Nap rooms at Google are there because it's safer than walking to your car. And for my first 5 years, I did one all-nighter, except when I was on vacation, and the vacations were few and far between. Like 130 hours a week, there's only 168 hours in a given week. I mean, clearly she's implying that all this overwork, these pure hours she put in, is why she's successful, why she's a multimillionaire, how she became the CEO of Yahoo, right? Like, she's implying that the pure hours you put in mean you're going to be successful, right? Completely glamorizing it. This is my other favorite one from Marissa Mayer, and this one enrages me every single time I see it. It's hard for me to even look at it. But basically, she says, like, her husband works at a co-working space, and she says that if you go in on a Saturday afternoon, she can tell you which ones are going to succeed by who's there. For the people who are there on Saturday, she can pretty much tell you that they're going to succeed. Like, those are going to be successful companies, right? The sheer arrogance of being able to say that if you're working a weekend, if you're a warm body in a seat on a weekend, you're very likely to be successful is so insane. But, you know, this is what we have leaders of Silicon Valley telling us, right? And so between not having any time to do our work and then doing too much work, I'd say the results are fairly clear. There are many people who are stressed, they're exhausted, they're not producing good work, and you just end up being unhappy, right? And if we don't end up doing something about it, if we don't try to talk about it and try to address it, it's just going to end up being this vicious cycle, right? These unhappy sort of chaotic times are just going to keep repeating themselves, right? We work at one job for a while, it's great, we work there for a couple years, and then we burn out, then we leave for the next job. It's cool for a little while because it's new, then we start seeing the same patterns again, we leave, same thing, keeps going on and on, right? We need to fix the underlying issues. We need to start talking about what the underlying issues are. Now, there is hope, and I do want to let you know that change is possible. So after 13 years of that, the past 6 years has shown me that it's actually quite possible to do something different, right? It is possible to create an environment where stress is minimized, where you feel challenged, but you don't feel rushed all the time, right? So why is this even important? Like, why do I care about this topic? Why should you care about this topic? And over the past 6 years, I've kind of thought a lot about work and its relationship to life, more or less corresponded with when my kids were born. And I realized, of course, that work is a big part of our lives, right? To me, it's an important part of my life. I've always taken my commitment to work seriously. I've always wanted to do well. There's nothing wrong with that, to take pride in what you do. I'm sure many of you do out there as well. Now, I wouldn't say I love working. I would love to sit on an island drinking mojitos all day. That would be great. But in the real world, when you do actually have to work, it's okay to be proud of it. It's okay to say it's part of your life. The counterpoint, of course, is that work is not our actual lives, right? There are much bigger things that we all care about. Being a good partner, being a good parent, loving your dog, taking care of your relationships, your hobbies. All of those things obviously are more important than work, right? And so these things need to be able to coexist, right? Those things that are important to you, your life and your time, shouldn't be overwhelmed by work, right? Work can be a part of your life without taking over your life. So how do we fix this? Well, there's no real big secrets to it. We basically have to do the exact opposite of what we have been doing, right? So one, we have to be able to actually do work at work, which sounds insane, but true, right? We need to set up environments where work is our number one priority, where we can focus on work with fewer interruptions, where we can work smarter and not harder. The second thing is that we have to prevent overwork, right? We need to recognize and reiterate to everybody around us that 40 hours a week is plenty, right? That we need to come to an understanding that anything more than 40 is probably not going to be productive, and most likely it's going to be detrimental. And so today I'm going to talk about practical tactics and strategies that hopefully you can implement at your own work. And these are not sort of philosophies or theories. These are things that we did at Basecamp. I want to take a second to just reiterate sort of who I'm talking to. I think there's a few potential sort of audiences or kind of people out in the audience. The first is that there are people out there who believe in the message, but they're maybe not even sure how to enact change. So hopefully I can give you some ideas on how to do that. The second group is maybe folks who feel like something's off, like I know I don't love it, something feels weird, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Hopefully we can put a pin to what the actual problem is. And thirdly, I think there's leaders out there on teams or in companies who know that people are their biggest asset, who know they have to have these people to do great work, and they want to keep them around for a long time. Now, if you're the kind of person who believes in the 120-hour work week or the 80-hour work week, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be able to convince you otherwise. I hope that I do, but I think probably I'm not going to be able to. I do also want to take a second and recognize that this is a pretty privileged position for me to be in, to be able to talk about something like this, right? Not everybody has a choice in the matter. Not everybody is as fortunate to be able to say, leave your job or, change this or change that at your company, right? Obviously not everybody can do that. And so I recognize that. But at the same time, I don't think that's a reason not to take a stance. In fact, I think it's good to try to speak up and help those people who can't speak for themselves. Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about being able to actually do work at work. The first thing we got to do in general is we got to avoid small interruptions, right? These are sort of the day-to-day interruptions that happen that we've all become used to. These aren't the huge, many-hour meetings, but these are the little small things that happen throughout the course of a day, right? Sort of a death by 1,000 paper cuts problem. Now, most of these small interruptions happen because they're relics of synchronous communication, right? Most or many companies still favor synchronous communications, right? So we're talking about phone calls, chat or IM in your company where the culture assumes an immediate response is basically synchronous, or you physically go tap somebody on the shoulder. The problem is when someone chooses synchronous communications, you're almost always interrupting someone on the receiving end, right? So what you're saying is if you go interrupt somebody, however you do that, what you're saying is what I need right now is more important than what you're working on right now. So please give me an answer. Stop what you're doing. I have something I need. Please help me, right? Obviously, people are not just sitting around waiting to give other people answers, right? When was the last time you were just sitting around your office just like, I'm awaiting questions instead of doing my own work, right? That's not something that happens. And once that person's interrupted, that person's flow, the stuff that they're working on, that's gone. Like, it doesn't come back. It takes a little while for them to pick it back up. Maybe they decide to take another break or whatever else happens. But it's not like you interrupt somebody and then 10 seconds later they're back into doing exactly what they're doing. It just doesn't happen. Now, if that happens once or twice a day, sure, maybe you can absorb it. If that happens 3 to 5 times a day, you're screwed. Your day is done. You are completely baked and you're not getting anything good done that day. The reality of it, of course, is that it can wait, right? There is rarely a time when your question, your pull request, whatever, can't wait for an hour or two for that person to finish what they're doing and then get back to you when they can, right? There's very few actual emergencies at work. Of course, there are some, right? Something goes down, something's crashing like crazy. But it's few and far between in the regular course of a normal week. So strategically and tactically, how do we fix this? That's the problem, how do we fix it? The first thing is that we have to agree as a general strategy and on your team or at your company that there should be no such thing as ASAP, right? We need to begin to set the expectation that this cannot happen, right? In fact, we should flip it. We should have the opposite expectation. We should say, let's assume everything is going to be a wait. If you contact someone, assume you are not going to get an immediate answer. When you contact someone, it's probably going to take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour for them to get back to you. Don't assume you're going to get stuff back quickly and your expectations won't be met. Again, remember, there's very few actual emergencies, so if we can start to set this thinking in our teams that like we don't need immediate responses, we'll be better off. Now, tactically, something we can do is that we can all work like we're remote companies. I am obviously a little bit biased. I work at a company that is completely remote. But assuming you're not working at a remote company, one of the best ways of building the habits of being an asynchronous team is to pretend like you're remote, which is to say that if someone's sitting next to you, you treat them like they're 1,000 miles away. If someone's 1,000 miles away from you, you treat them like they're 1,000 miles away, right? By doing this, what you're doing is that you're committing to asynchronous communications, right? All those problems that I talked about, interrupting someone's flow via synchronous communications, that stuff goes away almost automatically by just implementing a remote-like work structure. So what does that involve? Firstly, no more shoulder tapping, right? You don't go over and you don't interrupt someone physically from what they're doing, right? You don't go over and say, hey, I need to interrupt you because it's very important, unless it really is really important. You physically don't go over and tap someone on the shoulder anymore, right? Use IM, Slack, email, messages, whatever you want, with the expectation that you'll get an answer back when they have time, not when it's convenient for you. Another way we work remotely is that we write everything down, right? It's because we can't go over and talk to someone if you assume somebody's 1,000 miles away from you. You obviously can't, physically talk to them all the time, right? And so you're forced to sort of write everything down. And these can take any shape that you want. These could be to-dos, these could be Trello cards, whatever they are, right? You can start to capture some of the decisions you made and how you got there. And there's a bunch of sort of side benefits to when you write everything down. One of those is that it's self-documenting, right? Anytime you write something down, hey, all of a sudden, a bunch of other people can read it. All of a sudden, a bunch of people can benefit by what you've created instead of just sort of a face-to-face meeting where 2 pieces of information went back and forth and then just went off to the ether, right? The problem with talking to someone in person is that usually after a meeting or a phone call or whatever, a lot of times those people don't go back and take notes and publish them all, right? But when you're forced to write everything down, all of a sudden everything becomes automatically documented. The other thing I think is important and I think is overlooked a lot is that writing everything down enables sort of the thoughtful, quiet voices on your team. The reality is that not everybody loves face-to-face communication. Not everybody loves talking, person to person. It's just the reality of it. So the big booming voices in meetings and all that kind of stuff, they may be the big booming voices, but you may be drowning out a lot of people who have really great ideas who prefer to write more thoughtfully, who prefer to take their time when they're thinking of questions, or they prefer to take their time when they're writing out their thoughts, right? This is a real valid thing, and it's a problem where sort of, again, the bigger voices can drown out some of the people who are a little bit more quiet or thoughtful. So again, these people then have an opportunity to have their ideas and their voices lifted up. One of the main things that we do with our writing is that we implement the idea of heartbeats and kickoffs. This is one of our sort of main ways of sort of staying in touch with other teams without it being a daily distraction, where you feel like you have to keep up with like all the teams in the company on a daily basis when that's not really necessary, right? So kickoffs for us are essentially done at the beginning of a cycle of work, whatever that period of time is. And the basic idea is to outline the general goals and intentions of what that team is going to do for that period of time. And then heartbeats are sort of the opposite. They're the wrap up at the end of the cycle that says sort of, here's what we accomplished, here's what we did achieve from our goals, here's what we didn't achieve, and maybe here's a little bit about what we're thinking about for the next cycle, right? So instead of this constantly reading a daily chain of messages or chat rooms where you feel like you have to stay connected to everything, you can connect once every 4 weeks, once every 2 weeks, whatever that period of time is that a team decides that they can implement these things. The second big thing we need to do is that we need to avoid the sort of major interruptions. Once we get past all those sort of smaller day-to-day ones, we need to get past the bigger ones. And I guess I should just say flat out what I mean. We need to avoid meetings. If ever there was something I felt strongly about, it's how terrible most meetings are. How many of you have been in a terrible meeting, let's say in the last 2 weeks? Very good. Not really very good, but obvious. Happens all the time, right? They're terrible for so many reasons. I can barely count all the ways, but let me try to give you a couple. The first is they're just guaranteed to have too many people, right? More people are invited than is necessary. There's no question about it. There are entire articles devoted to the subject. Here's one quote from an article I read. It says, "Why does it happen? Because people hate to be excluded, and meeting organizers will invite anyone just to avoid hurt feelings." Like, that's great. Like, I'm glad we're not hurting anybody's feelings, but it just balloons every possible meeting to be ineffective. There's also no such thing as a 1 hour meeting. Unless you're having a meeting by yourself, which seems like that would be challenging, you can never have a 1 hour meeting. A 10-person meeting is a 10-hour meeting, right? A lot of people think like, I scheduled just a 1 hour meeting, like what's the big deal? But if you bring 10 people into that meeting, that's 10 hours of lost productivity. That's the way you need to think of these meetings, right? And again, as we've discussed before, like, it's not like those 10 people like automatically go back and they're instantly productive again. It just doesn't happen. It takes them time to ramp back up to what they were doing. So you're losing more than 10 hours, really. You're losing well more than 10. Another reason they suck, information imbalance, right? Everybody comes in with different information. Everybody comes in needing different things from the meeting. There's usually like one person who needs everybody there. That's like the project manager usually. Everybody else is there for different reasons. That's why people are zoning out, paying attention when they need to, not paying attention other times. Like, there's a complete information imbalance, right? So this is why you always see kind of people looking off, checking email, not paying attention the whole time. They spawn more of themselves. Like, they're so inefficient with too many people that you never make any decisions, right? So you sit there, you talk with a group of 8 people, and then you're like, well, we didn't decide anything. Let's have another meeting later tomorrow or something like that, where just the people who need to be there need to be there. Happens all the time. And then lastly, they are like scheduled interruptions. It's like saying like, hey, here's a way for sure we're gonna screw up your day today. Like at 10 o'clock today, we're gonna screw your day. So plan around it, right? If you're anything like me, when you know you have a meeting on the books, you sort of tend to avoid doing any big work, right? So if I start my workday at 8 o'clock and I have a meeting at 8:30, like, I'm not starting my big heavy lifting work at 8 o'clock because I know I'm gonna be interrupted at 8:30, right? I know that I have to leave at 8:28 to start up the meeting and get into it, right? So I'm not starting anything important. You do that again a couple times through the day and it becomes a real distraction, right? If that meeting wasn't there, I might decide to take a much bigger, more productive chunk of work. Okay, so we gotta fix this. How do we fix meetings? Well, here's a crazy idea. Try not having one. Sometimes the simplest answer is the best. And I know this is difficult at a lot of companies. I've worked at big companies where meetings are unavoidable, so I recognize that, but it's worth a shot. What you need to ask yourself is, do we really need to have this meeting? Not should we have it, not will there be some benefit, not would it be good if we do. Like, do we actually need this meeting, right? Could we do this in written format? Is this meeting as important as doing 10 hours of work right now? Like, if you think about it that way, right? What would happen if we didn't have this meeting? Like, everybody would go do their work probably, right? We can challenge ourselves to make meetings more like the last line of defense instead of the first line of defense. You can also apply the 3-person rule. And here I say the number that works best for your company, asterisk. So I'm not going to bullshit you and say we don't ever have meetings at Basecamp. We do, but this is a key sort of guideline that we adhere to. We try to follow this basically 3-person rule. This is about as big of a meeting that makes sense for us. There are articles like in HBR and Harvard Business Review that say that 8 is the like optimum number. Again, you need to find what works for you and the size of your company and how your team works. But for us, it's 3. So figure out what that number is for you. 3 people for us offers a lot of interesting things. It's enough for everybody in the room to be involved, right? You might have 2 programmers and a designer. It's enough to break ties. It's enough for someone to say like, well, 2 of us think that this is right and 1 of us maybe don't agree, right? So 3 is a really nice number for us. Try to find something that works for you that's as small as possible. Plan your escape. Like, try to get out of meetings. Don't feel bad about not going to meetings that you don't need to be. The worst thing they can do is say, no, we need you there, right? Just ask. Again, we've talked about the fact that people invite people to meetings for a lot of weird reasons. So they feel bad or they don't want them to feel excluded or whatever else. If you got something going on and you need to do work, most of the time they'll just be like, sure, that's fine, right? Deciding to include who to include can be tough, but too many managers default to including everyone because they don't want people to feel left out, right? So show that confidence. Be able to say like, I don't need to be in this meeting. Our team is represented or whatever else it is, and go do your work. And then lastly, try a new way. Maybe you still need to have meetings. Maybe you still need to discuss something. This was interesting. Victoria from Buffer wrote this up a couple weeks ago. She talked about how they were having difficulty scheduling meetings, right? They're across a bunch of different time zones. They're remote. And so they were having trouble doing face-to-face, like a hangout. And so they experimented with a bunch of different tools, a bunch of different writing tools, in a sort of slower and more thoughtful way. And this ended up working out for them. At the end of the article, basically, they figured out a way to do more like a threaded conversation, basically, like in a bunch of messages, that effectively mimicked what they needed to do in the meeting. So does it have to be a meeting? Maybe there's another way. The third way that we can, the third thing we need to keep in mind is that we need to start avoiding chat. Every time Slack goes down, what's the #1 Twitter joke trope? It's like, hey, now I can get some work done, right? Slack's down, now I can get some work done, right? It's sad, but it's true. Chat apps have become like one of the biggest productivity drains that have ever been created, which is weird because chat is naturally asynchronous. But it's been abused so badly at so many companies that it no longer is, right? Chat has basically become this thing where it's like required reading, where if you're not in the company Slack, like throughout the whole day, that you have this feeling that you're not contributing to the work, that you're not a decision maker or whatever else, right? That if you're not plugged into all these conversations, that your voice won't be heard. And chat is great for many things. You need to hash things out quickly with a team. Chat's great. But it's terrible if it's like a news ticker that you're expected to follow all day, every day, right? If we physically try to embody what that meant in a 50-person company, that would be like 50 of us stood around a water cooler and we're just shouting across at each other the whole day while people in the inner circle are trying to work, right? We would never do that. It's insane. There's no expectation that you would ever do that in the real world, yet there's an expectation in Slack that you can be connected to it all the time. I'm sorry, in chat, not just Slack. So that's obviously crazy. We can't keep doing that. So how do we fix that? Well, I don't really have a great solution for this. The biggest thing is that as a team, as a company, as leaders, we need to start to remove the expectation that chat is required reading, right? We have to relinquish the idea that in order for you to get your job done, that you have to stay plugged into it all the time, that it's a necessary vehicle for you to get your work done. I don't know any other way to say it. How you get there is tough, but that's just one of the things that we have to come to accept. One thing you can tactically do is that you can use a slower gear. So at Basecamp, we have the concept of gears, which is basically like high gears and low gears, right? High gears are really anything that's really fast communications, meetings, chats, IMs, whatever else, things like that. And then we have the concept of slower gears. These can be to-dos, messages, emails, anything that's more thoughtful and sort of you have time to write it out and you're not just jabbing with people on chat, right? So that could be anything. That could be GitHub issues, Google Docs, Dropbox paper, whatever works for you. Something where you have to compose something and not where it's just line by line by line by line, right? If you must continue to use chat, then we have to find a way to just treat it as truly asynchronous instead of this, everybody's always on it. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears a bit over to preventing overwork. So we're trying to sort of tried to talk a little bit about how do we prevent those interruptions so we can actually do our work. Now let's actually stop overworking. Sometime in the past 5 years especially, certainly even in the last 10, the idea of working 80 to 120 hours somehow became like cool and heroic, which is really perverse and messed up if you think about it. And I kind of wonder sometimes, like, how did all this get started and like what happened here? And then I think back like, oh, here's a picture I took at Google I/O in 2016 of the eat, sleep, code, repeat mantra that they printed on shirts and were selling to everybody. And then I was like, all right, whatever. Then there's Google I/O at 2017 where they had the hoodies that said code is life. Like there's really nothing else left in life. $60 for a hoodie too, by the way. Kind of a rip. There's a Revolut CEO who basically said like, hey, I noticed nobody's working weekends to catch up and anybody who doesn't catch up is going to be fired. We've got the folks over at Locker Dome who say that if your goal is to have a 9-to-5 job, then this is not the place for you. But if you want to be on the right side of history, you have made the right choice. He goes on, Locker Dome is so good, I had to give two. They expressly forbid working remotely, and they also expect you to answer the phone all the time, regardless of the time of day. And he demands prompt attendance and unwavering attention at meetings. It's gold. This shit is gold. So, there's a couple more. This is from Cerner from back in 2001. This is an old article. It leaked a long time ago. This hasn't happened just in the last 5 years. This guy was saying, the parking lot's never full at 8. I don't know what you guys are doing. You're creating expectations that are making it very unhealthy. It's just good stuff. I have some thoughts on it too. I noticed Tim Cook at the end of WWDC, the last WWDC said, so like thankful for all the people who gave up their nights and weekends, and I was just appalled by that as well. So basically my response to all these people is this. What all these people don't seem to understand, it seems so basic and something that we all understand, which is that obviously it's critically important that we take time away from work, right? We all inherently know this. Your brain needs it, right? We think more clearly, we're more focused. We just do better work when we're not constantly working. There's this great article by Mark Manson, who's sort of just like a self-help kind of guy, where he talks about how working less is better and how you can solve a lot of problems in the background, right? And again, we know this, right? How often have you solved a problem when you just like took a walk, came back and you had the solution, took a shower, woke up in the morning, right? When you weren't actually actively thinking about the problem. You solve it, you come back and you have it, right? So he says, solving problems is like food to your mind or food to your stomach. A variety of stimulation is good, but too much of it and you're going to get sick and tired of it, right? So getting away from work makes you better at work. Balance also makes you better at your job. Having other interests plays a part in your problem solving, plays a part in your creativity and your thinking. There's this quote that I read in the New York Times recently talking about how some of the most successful people in the world are not one-dimensional people. Compared to other scientists, Nobel laureates are at least 22 times more likely to partake as an amateur actor, dancer, magician, or other type of performer. People who specialize in one thing succeed early, but then they slide back to mediocrity as their minds rigidify. And then one thing I would argue is that I think you tend to build more empathy when you're away from work. You learn to apply your skills more empathetically when you have outside interests, right? And that's an important thing when you're developing software for other human beings, right? If all you do is software 24/7, arguably you're probably not the most empathetic person, right? Your work and the apps that you build are going to suffer. So having a broader set of interests, having time away from work, will make you empathetic and ultimately better at your job. All right, let's fix this. So one of the biggest sort of strategic overall things that we have to come to an agreement upon is that we need to recognize that 40 hours a week is absolutely enough, right? This is a basic premise strategy that we have to accept. If you think about it, half of your waking hours over a 5-day period are at work, right? So let's say you're awake for 16 hours a day, right? And you're getting 8 hours of sleep. That means if you're working 8-hour days, literally half of your waking hours are spent at the office, right? So put it another way. Let's say you've got kids and they go to bed at 9 o'clock every day, right? You come home at 5 p.m. sharp and you spend the entire 4 hours with them till they go to bed, right? You're still only spending 20 hours a week with them during that 5-day period. You are literally spending double the amount of time with people you work with than your own family during the course of a week, right? And that's okay, but that's why it's so important to protect your weekends and your nights, right? That time belongs to you. 40 is enough. We need to get past this myth, this ideology that hours is productivity, right? This stupid hustle programmer myth that like there's a linear relationship between the hours you put in and the work you produce. Like, we know that's not true. This is what the Marissa Mayer quote was talking about earlier. It's just a terrible idea that you could somehow measure productivity in pure hours. This is from that Mark Manson article as well. You know, like a muscle, your brain tires out. Any kind of problem solving or important decision making that you do, there's only so much you can do in a day. And to some degree, after 40, you actually get worse, right? If you think about it, if you're actually honest with yourself, in an 8-hour day, how much good actual work are you doing? 4 hours, 5 hours, if you're lucky? Like, I'm talking about time where you're actually producing really good work. Is that doing an extra 2-3 hours a night really going to push you over the top? Is that going to be the thing that gets you over the mountain? Like, probably not. If anything, it's just going to make you more tired, and you're just going to make more mistakes, right? So there are times where doing more than 40 is just worse. All right, so how do we actually strategic or tactically fix this? Well, we have to confine work to work hours. Maybe that sounds obvious, but that's what we have to do. So the first thing we can do is that we just need to establish some ground rules. As a team, as a company, you need to come up with some basic expectations of what happens during work hours and what happens after work hours. During normal hours, let's say 9 to 5, it's okay to contact me, but after that, maybe it's not, right? There are a lot of assumptions that people will make because of just history and all the other things that they've gone through, that it's okay to contact somebody at 7 o'clock at night. Or maybe it's okay to send an email on the weekend because you don't expect a response, but then the other person feels like they have to respond, right? There's all these sort of assumptions and like you're not sure how it is. So the more explicit, the more purposeful you can be about what are our basic ground rules on our team for when you send me a message and how I should respond, right? At Basecamp, it's very simple. After 5 o'clock or after your normal working hours, if you send me something, there's no expectation that I'll respond. If you send me something on the weekend, there's certainly no expectation that I'll respond. I'll get back to you the morning after or on Monday. That's our guidelines. So you just have to come up with something on your own, but you have to have something that's explicit. You should establish the channel for true emergencies. So you can't reuse the same way you work in a normal day with the same as your emergency channel. So like, let's say you use email to do a lot of your communications. Like, email should not be the way that you reach somebody if the servers crash, right? You should be using SMS, Signal, whatever, some other way so that you don't conflate those two things. So that if somebody actually gets a message via Signal or whatever else, you know, like, oh, that's an actual emergency that I have to respond to. It's not conflated with your sort of normal communications channel. Coach the rule breakers. So a lot of times people don't know they're doing anything wrong. Like, it's not their fault. They're either used to doing it a certain way, so they will expect immediate answers and they just don't know any better. And then there are also the people who do the overworking, right? Sometimes the person sending it doesn't mean anything, and the person who receives it is like, again, like I said earlier, I have to respond to this immediately, right? We just need to help coach those people because, again, without clear expectations, everybody kind of thinks differently about like, oh, the boss sent me an email, I got to respond, or my boss sent me an email. So like, being as clear as you can about this and coaching those people to follow those expectations. Obvious? Like, take a vacation. Like, actually take a vacation. And if you're on the other side of that, if your teammate goes on vacation, don't contact them, don't assign them work, don't have them come back to a pile of other stuff, right? Just assume they're unreachable. And if you're on vacation, for God's sakes, like, don't check in. Your company will be fine, your team will be fine, the work will proceed without you. I know it's hard to believe, but everything will be fine. So you will benefit much, much more by actually taking a vacation and letting your brain escape for a little bit. And then lastly, just forget this myth that you always have to be learning. If you read enough productivity articles or go to enough conference talks or whatever else, you might be forgiven to think that like, hey, you always got to be learning. Every day you got to learn something. Every day you got to be doing something like that. No, you don't. That's not even realistic. Like, there are many days in my life where I just have done my day of work. I didn't learn anything. I just pumped out some work. And like, I was having a bad week. Something happens, right? Like, this idea that you constantly have to be learning all the time, that you have to read every day some amount or whatever it is, like, just let that go. I'm sure it works for some people and it's great, but it's okay to give yourself a break, right? It's okay. If some days you feel like shit and you don't want to learn, that's fine. Be okay with that. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is shaping up your projects. And this is a very tactical, but an important thing. It's one way that helps you not overwork and as a result allows you to take time away from work. And it's about figuring out how to appropriately set up your projects so that you're not just constantly overworking. Ryan at Basecamp wrote this ebook called Shape Up, and it's worth a read. It's not applicable to everybody, and I don't mean this to be an advertisement for everything that we do. It's not that. I just think that there are bits in here that are applicable to everybody, and I think it's worth reading and understanding a way of setting up work that could be very helpful to you. I want to summarize just a couple of the main points that I think are more globally relatable. So we work in 6-week cycles. Again, I have my asterisk to pick the number that works best for you, right? Pick some amount of time to be your block of choice, right? This has to be a period of time that is long enough for you to get a significant amount of work done, but not so long that you're constantly languishing, right? It can't be months and months in work where you don't ship anything, right? So how you get there or what that period of time is going to vary. 6 weeks, we honed in on that after like 10 years of figuring it out. So it's not like you're going to figure it out right away. But after many years, we figured out sort of 6 weeks is the appropriate amount of time where we can do a big chunk of work, but not let it sit for months on end. Learn to manage the tension between time, quality, and scope. This might sound obvious if you've never done it, though. It takes some practice. And so the fundamental idea is obviously those things are always at odds with each other, right? The determining factor of how successful your project is going to be and how much time you spend working on it is going to be how well you manage these three things, right? If you have a really big scope, then you're going to need more time or the quality is going to suffer, right? If time is what you have a lot of, then maybe you can increase scope. There's a bunch of different things that happen here. This is a broad statement. I think the book helps sort of like narrow that in, but I think this could be really helpful. Good is relative. This one's easy. Great is the enemy of good, right? There's always something you can make better. That last 10%, you keep knocking on something, like just to make it perfect, it might not even matter. So be okay with shipping something that's good. Trust and autonomy. I think we'd all be just a little bit better off if we just kind of trusted our coworkers a bit more. The more that you trust them, the more they can kind of get the work that they need to be doing, and you don't need to sort of handhold them all the time. So we use this phrase at work called commitment, not consensus. Sometimes we call it disagree and commit. And this is a situation where you might not agree with something 100%, but you're still behind that person. You still are like, okay, well, I don't necessarily see it that way, but you believe strongly in it. I'm going to back you up. We're going to go this direction. And I trust you, and we'll see how it goes. You don't have to agree on everything, but it's great to get behind your teammates. And then finally, no backlogs. I'm sure this is going to be controversial. You shouldn't feel obligated to keep a list of stuff that you just didn't get to, right? Backlogs have this way of sort of weighing you down and forever reminding you all the things you never finished, right? It's just this huge list that always grows. It's like, well, here's all the shit we never finished, and it just keeps growing and growing, right? There's sort of like a bad memory of things that you always have never accomplished, right? And there's a lot of different reasons that those things get moved to the backlogs. The basic premise is that good ideas will come back. I've seen this happen over and over and over, is that we log stuff and then we clear them out, and then eventually the stuff that's actually important to us at the time we're doing a new phase of work, that stuff always comes back. Those ideas that are good always find a way to come back. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping up. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Is any of this even possible, Dan? Like, this is great. You work at a company that's progressive, and this would never work in my company. And I think that's fair. But I would say that you have a choice, right? Like, if you don't have the power to change how this works at your company at a company level, change it at a local level, right? Change yourself, change your own expectations of how you and your team can work, right? Change how you interact with people, change how you communicate, start leading by example, right? If there's a cause you care about, you're probably not going straight to Congress and start lobbying Congress, right? You're probably going to start with your friends, with your local community. Like, you're going to work small and get bigger and bigger and bigger. Same thing sort of applies here. Also, shit happens. Sometimes it's still going to be crazy, if you can believe it. I had to put together 2 talks in the last 4 days. My Android coworker is out on sabbatical. We've got new work coming in. We've got bugs to fix. My kids are starting school. I'm going camping next weekend. This is like one of the worst times that I had in the last 3 months. So I'm not saying I've got it all figured out, that it's always going to be perfect. I just hope that some of these things can help guide you to a calmer work environment. If any of these ideas sound good to you, or you want to read more about it, there's a book called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. My bosses, Jason and David, wrote it. Again, I'm sorry if this sounds like an advertisement, but I have copies of the book if you guys are interested in learning more, even more ways of sort of helping out how to have a calmer work environment. Please grab one. You don't have to even talk to me. Just come and grab one if you think you're interested in it. I'll leave you with this. It's a quote from the Basecamp Handbook. I just really liked a quote, and I thought it was a good place to end. We're glad you love this job because we do too, but at the end of the day, it's a job. Do your best work, collaborate with your team, write, read, learn, and then turn off your computer and play with your dog. We'll all be better for it. And with that, thank you for listening.